Alright guys, time for another game theory video. Remember, if you like these videos, leaving a bullshit comment, a silly comment, whatever, like, sub, whatever, it helps the channel. So I'm going to continue a conversation that gets asked, or a question that gets asked me on stream pretty often, and just a video I've made before many times, is how do you get good at video games without even playing them? And in the last video, I gave that sort of analogy of like that the Little Prince. The Little Prince had that part in the book where all the adults, they didn't know what they were doing anymore. They just kind of looked down. They weren't looking for anything anymore. And there's that line in the Little Prince where, why do the children still look out the window? Because the children still know what they're looking for, right? So you got to know what you're looking for, right? And I want to talk about how, in this video specifically, talk about how you can apply knowledge from one game to another game that will make you better at a video game, right? And I'll give you some real life examples, some real trap shit. Trapaholics. I don't think I can do the voice anyway. No more of that. So why playing lots of video games can actually make you good at video games, right? Or other games, right? And I'm gonna give some examples, right? So let's look at a random example, and I'm gonna suck myself off here, and I'll give some bad examples too, but first let's suck myself off, right? Give me a little jank. Let's look at a game like Karnow's Revenge, right? How was I able to get good at Karnow's Revenge so fast without playing it? If you recall, the story was basically, well, let's just go with it. Okay, so basically, as a kid, of course I had seen Fighter's History and Karnow's Revenge. I've played it randomly, you know what I mean? I thought Mizuguchi was cool, right? Real baby Clayton played that game. And I remember then, years and years after that game, there's a couple of quotation marks, crazy Japanese combo videos for the game that supposedly would never happen, right? But just combo video combos, right? And eventually I had gotten a new computer, or a computer that was actually good enough to play video games on it, right? You know what I mean? I think it was after all the dying stuff happened. So a bit after that, right? And I remembered, oh, I can play video games on my computer again. I remember Karnow's Revenge, maybe I'll play it. And I remember thinking back to it years and years ago, during the early 2000s, there's all these supposedly high-level Japanese matches of the game and crazy combo videos. And I was like, okay, let me look at this shit. And as a player, because I had played so many different kinds of video games at this point, playing a game like Guilty Gear, which of course, combos are a necessary evil, if you will, progression of fighting games. I'm not saying it's all bad, but there is potentially evil in them. But Guilty Gear, if we think about old school Guilty Gear, we think about how potentially in certain aspects execution heavy it is. And I used to do all those supposedly humanly impossible things and whatever, Guilty Gear, right? So I looked at these Karnow's Revenge things, these supposedly combos that could never happen, blah, blah, blah. And as an adult with my life experience of playing video games, I was like, my perspective was different on it, Maybe when I saw that before, I was like, wow, that was crazy. But you know what? After all these years, seeing it again, I was like, I could do that. My perspective is no longer the same. I could do that. And you know what? I put in the game and boom. I was like, yeah, dude, like my perspective on what is possible in a video game was totally different at that point as an adult seeing the game again, knowing what I've done before. And of course, as the story goes, basically learned that game just randomly playing a few minutes, a couple weeks or something like that. I started being the top people, and then a couple weeks later I was basically one of the top people in the world, and then a couple months the Japanese had a thread on 2chan that it was too good, and I made the game unfun for everybody. But the point was that because I had a different perspective on what was possible in a game from playing different games, I was able to look at the game through a different glass. I was the child looking out of that train window, and I knew what I was looking for. I knew what was capable in video games at this point, right? And I think when you play lots of different video games, it gives you a different potential perspective on a game, right? That's why I think even playing 3D games, I think 3D games playing, even, I generally play, I have made Soul Calibur videos before, but I think playing 3D games can help you get a different perspective sometimes on a 2D game. If we think about games like Soul Calibur, Virtual Fighter, and I guess Tekken, I don't really care about Tekken, but, we think about maybe from a sort of basic level of a 3D game, I think you think of them as a pretty more methodical than a Street Fighter game, right? excuse me, when you think about the way that you tap and you space, fishing for counter hits, etc., to be able to enjoy games like that sometimes, Soul Calibur, Virtual Fire, whatever it is, you have to enjoy a sort of methodical sort of approach to the game, right? And so if you start playing games like that randomly or gain a appreciation for a game like that, you can then finally come back to maybe a Street Fighter game where, say, if you're in a matchup in your Street Fighter game where maybe your character is at a disadvantage, perhaps. Maybe your character is not as free-flowing in this particular matchup. From playing a 3D game before or gaining a appreciation for it, you can then kind of try to gain the appreciation to now play your Street Fighter game through a more methodical approach, right? Maybe before when you were a kid and you're like, oh, this matchup just sucks, blah, blah, I gotta play this specific way, it's not good, but after playing different games, say a Soul Calibur, Virtual Fire, like, oh, I have to be able, if I want to even enjoy this game, I have to enjoy a methodical approach. And so then you can go back to maybe that Street Fighter game where your character is not so powerful in this specific matchup, and they have to play potentially more methodical. And then you can gain an appreciation for that. I think that's also why it's important to, I know fighting games are inherently competitive, so there is an ego and a competitive nature to it too. But assuming you do not play every fighting game to just play the best character, right? You're not playing the most OP character, the top tier character. You're playing characters you like. And sometimes you'll find these characters that are not necessarily powerful have to play some matchups a little potentially different. So you'll have to appreciate that methodical approach. Say a character like Guy. You know what I mean? Playing Guy in Street Fighter Alpha 1, whatever it might be, is quite a bit different than playing Guy in Street Fighter 4. Because Street Fighter 4, in terms of how you tap in certain footsie situations, if you will, you know what I mean, is much different than Alpha 1. So you have to be able to appreciate a perspective of a game like that, playing your character. And if you play characters that are not necessarily always overpowered, you're just playing the character because you like it, you're going to have to gain a new appreciation for making that character work again if you aren't just a tier whore, right? You have to gain an appreciation for making different kinds of play styles work with your character in a game if they do not necessarily just abuse the game system, if you will, right? So that's why I think that playing different games are very important, because they can give you an appreciation then when you go back to an old game, right? And of course, there are things that when you don't like, I don't play a lot of games, right? I know this hurts people's feelings. They want to think that I play video games all the time when I was winning those tournaments. And man, there's that one guy, oh, you're only winning when no one cared about games, like blah, 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 blah. Or blah, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, dude, I'm sure, dude. Like, pretty sure I've beat a lot of people. I mean, you could still go, even when I, quotation marks, came back to video games after all those years and I was playing under fake names. You can see my fake names even on YouTube. People are like, oh, this is so-and-so's fake account. I heard blah, blah, blah. It's actually my fake account. I just had to make fake accounts because I was beating people so bad. I couldn't get people to play me in all these fucking random games, right? But so you have to gain a different appreciation for games, right? And when you don't play a lot of games, though, there is a bad kind of aspect to it. Like, you do have to, it takes a bit of a while to get into a groove for a game. I do think that, right? Like, to use Karna's Revenge again as an example, if I were to play Karna's Revenge again, right, it would take me a while. Certain games have different kinds of grooves you have to get back into. So if you look at a game like Karna's Revenge, miscellaneous cross-ups in Karna's Revenge differs from like a Street Fighter game in that you always block forward for a miscellaneous cross-up. Always err on the side of blocking forward in Karna's Revenge, basically, right? Which is different. And that's like a kind of mindset you got to remember, like, oh, that might take you a few matches to get into, right? And Karna's Revenge also has a very kind of, it's like OG Street Fighter 2 on steroids with a rock, paper, scissors kind of footsie mechanic, right? That's kind of how the game fundamentally works on some level. So you got to be really mashing your jabs all the time, and you got to put yourself back into that mindset. That's how the game is played. And sometimes that might take a while to get back into. If I was to play Super Turbo, lots of times if I go back and randomly play Super Turbo for a few matches, whatever, I have to get myself going again with, like, say, I'll miss walk up DPs a lot in Super Turbo if I'm not playing right. It takes me a bit to get into the groove. I have to, a lot of times when I play Super Turbo, you know, I have this like thought in my mind, like, oh, I gotta trust the process of Super Turbo when I DP here, blah 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 blah. You know, there's certain kind of aspects. If you don't play a lot of video games, there is a double-edged sword, right? That it will take a while to get into the groove, especially if you don't play a lot of video games. Period, right? You know what I mean? I can't physically play a lot of video games. Period, even if I wanted to. You know, even say Guilty Gear. I showed myself playing Guilty Gear. Even after all these years, only random playing video games, I can still do all those supposedly humanly impossible combos that no one else to this day has ever done in real matches. Go watch all the top Japanese, dude. None of them have ever done that kind of stuff that I've done in videos. But that's because I had the muscle memory, because I actually did teach myself it at one time, right? And there are certain bad aspects, because I don't play Guilty Gear a lot and I never played that Accent Core Plus R. There are certain situations that I know I'm not doing an optimal thing because I just haven't played the game enough to, you know, get the muscle memory to do it. Get the sort of like secondhand nature. I don't have the secondhand nature for it, right? But the foundational knowledge is kind of there, right? And of course, this stuff applies to, you know, combo videos and all this kind of. How am I able to accurately tell how all these video games are going to work without ever playing them? 20 years, don't even play these games. How was I able to tell all these games were going to work? Because I know what I was looking for, dude. I've played enough games that I can look at a game and I can be like, oh, that's kind of like that. That's kind of like that. I can put the pieces together, right? You know, knock on wood, maybe eventually it will change. But anyway, that's why I think it's important to play many different video games. And certain video games I do think are better than playing other games, like, say, a game like Super Turbo. I think when people ask what kind of games should you play to like get a kickstart on video games, I do think playing a game like Super Turbo, having a bit of a grasp for it is important, because a game like Super Turbo teaches you very fundamental core archetypical strengths of characters, right? You see how powerful the Fireball Dragon Punch trap is. You can see the antithesis, the thing that was going on with the community. It's a great story just for fighting games, period, right? If you think about Balrog versus Sagat, you know what I mean? These classic stereotypical archetypes of characters. You get a grasp of, you know, this is what made fighting games popular in the first place, right? You know, that's why I think playing a game like a 3D game is good, so you can start to appreciate more methodical approaches to video games and then apply it to others. I know I had a friend, he was saying, I don't know if I know, he was saying maybe Street Fighter V could be good because Street Fighter V is still a Street Fighter game in a sense, but it does have a sort of, you know, it was trying to appeal to a 3D audience. But I think personally, I would just say play a Street Fighter game standalone, play a fucking 3D game standalone. I wouldn't like, you know, I actually think I would enjoy the more methodical approach of a Street Fighter 4, actually, crazily enough, than a Street Fighter 5. But, and I do think certain games aren't good teachers. Like, I think, you know, lots of people, it's such a fake game. It's such a fake OG game, dude. Street Fighter Alpha 2 is such a fucking, well, it's such a hypocritical mess. You know, I've talked about why Street Fighter Alpha 2 is such a hypocritical game. You know, I don't think Street Fighter Alpha 2 is a good game to teach you fighting games, because the game is just, it's fucking nonsense. It's such a fake, hypocritical game in terms of footsies, like moves. Just, you look at moves and you're like, why does this move work like that? Why does this move work like that? Why does this move, like, these moves don't make sense, right? And then you have this aspect of, like, the community talks about, oh, it's so amazing footsies, you gotta be so honest, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but then you have your custom combos. One of the most un-Street Fighter things whatsoever. Like, how do you appreciate a game like that? What does that teach you about a game? I don't think Street Fighter Alpha 2 teaches you anything about fucking fighting games, actually. You know, not saying it's a bad game per se, but it's an extremely fucking hypocritical game. You know what I mean? So, there's certainly I think a game like Guilty Gear is good, you know, because it teaches you a progression of fighting games, what fighting games could be. You know, it has potentially more, in certain aspects, you know, executional barrier, which you should learn. And I do think for sure, though, I should say there is always a potentially best way to play a game, right? There's always potentially a best way to play a game. But for what it's worth, I guess the caveat to this, the argument to this would be that, of course, because games are being made more and more simple, because games are so pre-planned, I do think this sort of ideology or whatever, this thought process is potentially harder because games are more, again, pre-planned, contrived. So taking different aspects from other games and knowledge is not generally as applicable because games are so pre-planned. So it's harder to look at games through a different scope when the game is, the developers are already trying to decide how the game has to be played for you. But, you know, of course, even back in the day, there was, you know, she's hot, dude. She's into the daddy thing. She's fucking kinky. And that other girl that just messaged me, she's got these fucking big lips. God, I love fucking big lips. Please don't say I'm racist for liking big lips. I'm gonna turn that down. Can't believe someone tried to say that I hate black people because I like big lips. Oh my God, the video game community. But, so, you know, there is, of course, an aspect of that, you know, even back in the day, there was a proper way to play a game, a more optimal way to play a game. But nowadays it is getting harder. But I mean, even that's not even just video games, right? I think that's a society kind of thing. Everyone wants to be the star quarterback. You know, they got to make everyone feel like they're the best in the world, even though they've never done anything. Everyone's getting the gold star for the participation award. But, you know, even that's, you know, not even just video games. If we even look at, if we even just look at like society and popular culture, you know, look how many years now have things like anime, cartoons, whatever kind of media it might be. You know, back in the day, the hero used to be the whisper of a hero, right? The whisper of like an ideal, some unobtainable badass, whatever it might be, right? But nowadays, I did turn my phone off. I don't know why it's still beeping. Whatever. Nowadays, you know, nowadays the hero in media is, oh, hey, the hero next door. Or, oh, I'm the hero. You just didn't know it. Blah, blah, blah. Everyone's a hero, right? So it doesn't even apply just to video games, but... You know, that's really just a sad thing about culture, and I guess it even has poisoned itself in the video games. But anyway, another game theory video. Remember, if you like these videos, like it, subscribe, share the videos, blah blah blah. There's also PayPal, Patreon, super chat. Or I guess you can't super chat a bit. Whatever. If you like these kind of things, whatever helps it out or whatever. Yeah.